The Nile Valley has long been celebrated as the cradle of civilization, with Egypt receiving all the glory and attention from historians. What most people don't know is that just south of Egypt, an even older and equally sophisticated civilization flourished for thousands of years. Nubia, often dismissed as merely Egypt's neighbor, was in fact a powerhouse empire that developed independently, with its own writing system, pyramids, and advanced culture. Modern archaeology has proven that many elements we associate with Egyptian civilization actually originated in Nubia first. The evidence is overwhelming, yet most textbooks continue to minimize Nubia's contributions to world history. This systematic downplaying of Nubian achievements reveals an uncomfortable truth about how we record and value ancient civilizations. When we examine the timeline of African civilizations, Nubia clearly emerges as the elder statesman of the Nile Valley. While Egypt's dynastic period began around 3100 BCE, Nubia was already a complex society with organized kingdoms by at least 3500 BCE. The Kustul incense burner, discovered in Lower Nubia and dated to 3800 BCE, features royal iconography that predates Egypt's unification by centuries. This artifact alone shatters the conventional narrative that Egypt was the region's first advanced civilization. What's more, Nubia's development wasn't isolated. It maintained trade networks stretching to Mesopotamia and the African interior. The evidence suggests that Nubia wasn't just older than Egypt, but was likely the source of many cultural elements Egypt later adopted. The reluctance to acknowledge Nubia's primacy stems from deeply ingrained biases in how we view African history. Western scholars have long operated under the assumption that civilization must have come to Africa from elsewhere, rather than developing independently. Nubia's undeniable Black African identity makes this cognitive dissonance even more pronounced. When faced with artifacts that prove Nubia's sophistication predates Egypt's, many archaeologists have scrambled to find alternative explanations. Some claim Nubians must have copied Egyptian styles, despite the chronological impossibility of this theory. This intellectual dishonesty reveals how racial prejudice continues to shape our understanding of ancient history. Archaeological discoveries in Nubia over the past century have systematically been downplayed or misinterpreted to preserve Egypt's privileged position in history books. The Kustul burner's pharaonic imagery clearly demonstrates that royal symbolism existed in Nubia before Egypt's dynastic period began. Instead of accepting this evidence at face value, prominent institutions like the University of Chicago propose that Nubians were merely imitating Egyptian styles they hadn't encountered yet. This circular logic, claiming Nubians copied something that didn't exist, exposes the lengths scholars will go to protect the Egypt first narrative. Even when confronted with carbon dating and stratigraphic evidence, the academic establishment has been remarkably resistant to rewriting history. The implications of accepting Nubia's primacy would require completely rethinking the origins of civilization itself. The treatment of Nubia's pyramids provides another glaring example of historical erasure. While Egypt's approximately 120 pyramids are world famous, few people know that Nubia boasts over 255 pyramids, more than double the number. These Nubian pyramids, though smaller in scale, represent a continuous architectural tradition that lasted for over 1,000 years. What's particularly telling is how these structures are described in Western media, often called small or crude compared to Egypt's, despite their sophisticated design and preservation. The double standard becomes even more apparent when we consider that many Nubian pyramids were deliberately destroyed by European treasure hunters in the 19th century, including Italian explorer Giuseppe Forlini, who notoriously dynamited several pyramids at Meroë, destroying priceless historical monuments in his search for gold. This cultural vandalism was justified under the racist assumption that Nubian sites weren't valuable enough to preserve intact. The academic marginalization of Nubian studies continues to this day in more subtle but equally damaging ways. University programs focusing on ancient Egypt receive exponentially more funding and attention than those studying Nubian civilization. Museum exhibits continually Museum exhibits routinely display Nubian artifacts as footnotes to Egyptian collections rather than as evidence of an independent, advanced culture. Even terminology becomes a tool of minimization. Scholars often refer to Nubia as merely a corridor between Egypt and sub-Saharan Africa, rather than a civilization in its own right. This systematic devaluation has real consequences, shaping public perception and limiting research opportunities. The result is that while every school child learns about Egyptian pharaohs, Nubia's remarkable achievements remain largely unknown outside academic circles. This knowledge gap isn't accidental. It's the product of centuries of Eurocentric scholarship that couldn't reconcile Black Africa with advanced civilization. Nubia's contributions to what we now consider Egyptian civilization are far more extensive than most people realize. The pharaonic crown, the concept of divine kingship, and even the worship of certain gods all show clear Nubian origins predating their Egyptian adoption. The white crown of Upper Egypt, one of the most iconic symbols of pharaonic power, first appears in Nubian art centuries before its use in Egypt. Similarly, the worship of Amun, who would become Egypt's most important god, originated further south in Nubia and the land of Punt. Even the practice of pyramid building, Egypt's most famous architectural achievement, likely developed from earlier Nubian burial mounds. These cultural transfers flowed northward from Nubia to Egypt, contradicting the traditional narrative of Egyptian influence radiating southward. The evidence suggests that early Egyptian dynasties were profoundly shaped by their interactions with and likely origins from Nubian cultures. The Kingdom of Kush, Nubia's most powerful incarnation, eventually turned the tables on Egypt in dramatic fashion. During Egypt's third intermediate period, when the Nile Valley was divided and weak, Kushite kings invaded and established the 25th dynasty. Far from being barbarian conquerors, these Nubian pharaohs like Piankhi and Taharqa presented themselves as Egypt's legitimate rulers and guardians of its traditions. They restored neglected temples, revived artistic styles from Egypt's golden age, and defended the land from foreign threats. The 25th dynasty represents Africa's first pan-Nile empire, uniting Nubia and Egypt under black rule for nearly a century. This period saw a renaissance of Egyptian culture under Nubian leadership, proving that the civilizational flow could go both directions. The Kushites didn't destroy Egyptian culture. They preserved and reinvigorated it at a time when Egypt might have otherwise collapsed into obscurity. Nubia's influence extended far beyond its interactions with Egypt, demonstrating impressive achievements in its own right. The Kingdom of Meroë developed Africa's earliest known writing system south of the Sahara, the Meroitic script, which remains only partially deciphered today. Nubian metallurgists produced high-quality iron on an industrial scale, fueling trade networks across Africa. The city of Meroë boasted massive iron smelting operations, with slag piles still visible today, that testify to its industrial might. Nubian architects designed innovative water management systems, including elaborate wells and reservoirs called hafers, that supported agriculture in arid regions. The kingdom maintained diplomatic relations with powers as far away as Rome and possibly India, as evidenced by artifacts found at archaeological sites. These accomplishments reveal Nubia as a technologically advanced civilization that deserves recognition independent of its relationship with Egypt. The recovery of Nubia's true history has profound implications for how we understand Africa's place in world civilization. For centuries, Western historians argued that Black Africa had no significant historical achievements before European contact. Nubia's existence as an indigenous African civilization that predated and rivaled Egypt's completely demolishes this racist paradigm. The archaeological record proves that advanced urban societies developed in the heart of Black Africa without Mediterranean or Near Eastern influence. This evidence forces us to reconsider outdated models of cultural diffusion that always places Europe and Asia at the center of historical progress. Nubia's example shows that Africa was not just a recipient of civilization, but one of its primary sources. Recognizing this truth requires dismantling persistent stereotypes about African backwardness that continues to influence global politics and economics. The modern descendants of ancient Nubians continue to fight for recognition of their heritage against overwhelming odds. When the Aswan High Dam was constructed in the 1960s, it flooded much of lower Nubia, displacing tens of thousands of Nubian people and submerging countless archaeological sites. While international efforts saved major Egyptian temples like Abu Simbel, most Nubian sites were left to disappear underwater with minimal documentation. Today, Nubian communities in Egypt and Sudan struggle to preserve their language and traditions in the face of forced assimilation policies. Younger generations are often unaware of their ancestors' glorious past, having been taught history that centers Egypt while marginalizing Nubia. Grassroots movements are now working to revive Nubian identity through language programs, cultural festivals, and political activism. Their fight represents not just cultural preservation, but a reclamation of Africa's stolen historical narrative. Understanding Nubia's true significance changes how we view world history and contemporary racial dynamics. The deliberate minimization of Nubian achievements reflects broader patterns in how Black contributions to civilization have been systematically erased or attributed to others. This historical whitewashing has real-world consequences, reinforcing white supremacy by denying people of African descent their rightful legacy. When we restore Nubia to its proper place in history, we challenge the foundations of racist ideologies that still shape our world. The story of Nubia proves that civilization wasn't given to Black Africa, it originated there, in sophisticated forms that rivaled any contemporary society. As we continue uncovering Nubia's secrets through archaeology and deciphering its forgotten scripts, we may yet discover that this civilization's full importance has only begun to be understood. The recovery of Nubia's history isn't just about the past, it's about building a more truthful and equitable future. If this exploration of Nubia's forgotten empire has surprised you, imagine what else mainstream history might be hiding. The truth about Africa's past has been buried under layers of prejudice and misinformation for centuries. But with every archaeological discovery and every reassessment of ancient sources, we peel back another piece of the deception. I challenge you to question what you've been taught about ancient civilizations, whose stories are being told, and whose are being suppressed. The complete picture of human history is far more complex and fascinating than our textbooks reveal. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, and join me next time as we examine another chapter of Africa's stolen legacy. Remember, history belongs to those who tell it. Will you help tell Nubia's story? Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the Little Known History YouTube channel.